Good afternoon, everyone. I am Bianca Durrani, CEO of Aperio Philanthropy and co-host of today's webinar. It's so great to have you all here with us today. Aperio Philanthropy is a fundraising consulting firm with a vision for a world in which everyone can thrive. We exist to unleash the power of communities to drive change by dramatically expanding resources for nonprofits. Day to day, that means we get to work alongside community leaders and fundraisers to develop simpler, faster, and smarter ways to generate revenue for their missions. Our services include strategic advisory, hands-on support for projects, and embedded fundraisers, and we work with organizations nationwide. As a firm created to drive change, we are thrilled to be hosting this event series alongside New York University. For the past several years, we've been facilitating conversations with thought leaders and fundraisers on the role of philanthropy in creating change and solving complex societal problems. Today's topic will be donor advised funds and how to seize the opportunities that they present for nonprofits. And we're just so grateful for our very intelligent and expert panelists for being here today to share their experiences with all of us. It's my pleasure now to introduce our co-host, Michelle D'Amico.
Thanks, Bianca. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. And I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation. Before I turn this over to our impressive speakers, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Center for Global Affairs. Since its founding, our goal at the CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in global affairs and another MS in global security, conflict, and cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the topics covered in our classrooms. We are very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses, on-site intensives, and certificate in fundraising, we offer professionally oriented educational options for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom, such as today's moderator. I'm delighted to introduce Richard Feiner. Richard Feiner has over 20 years of experience in resource mobilization and philanthropy-driven development in a range of nonprofit and social benefit disciplines, including the life sciences, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and historic preservation. A graduate of Princeton University, Richard is Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at Weill Cornell Medicine, the Medical School of Cornell University, and he's a faculty member here at the Heyman Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Richard and today's panelists.
Thank you, Michelle. And hello and welcome everyone to this webinar. Today, we're going to explore donor-advised funds, giving vehicles that have come to dominate private philanthropy since the 1990s. Since 2020, assets in these funds have more than doubled, and nonprofits see an increasing share of revenue coming from them. With over $326 billion sitting in donor-advised funds waiting to be deployed, the opportunity for mission-driven organizations is enormous if we know how to seize the opportunity. In this session, we will explore trends and projections in donor-advised giving, how to engage donors who give through donor-advised funds, how to engage donor-advised sponsors and advisors, and common mistakes to avoid. To begin, it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel. Erika Albert currently serves as Senior Director, Major and Principal Gifts at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, where she has helped drive one of the nation's most successful major and planned giving programs. Erika's nonprofit journey is rooted in both her personal connection to St. Jude as a former patient and her top-tier education in fundraising and nonprofit management from Indiana University. Sharon Bean currently serves as a Senior Director of Planned Giving and Strategic Philanthropy at the International Rescue Committee, where she leads the organization's efforts to grow revenue through estate gifts, donor-advised funds, IRAs, and other complex assets. Sharon also spearheads initiatives to strengthen mission awareness and to foster collaborative partnerships with professional advisors. Dan Heist is an assistant professor of nonprofit management and leadership at the George W. Romney Institute for Public Service and Ethics at Brigham Young University. He researches philanthropy, charitable giving, and volunteering. Dr. Heist is a leading expert on donor-advised funds, and he is the co-founder of the Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative. And finally, Elaine Kenig currently serves as the Chief Communications Officer for Vanguard Charitable. In her role leading communications, analytics, and strategic planning, she focuses on building awareness of the benefits of strategic philanthropy and improving donors' charitable giving experiences. Thank you all for being with us and welcome all. So, to start us off and setting the stage, this is a question for all our panelists. Briefly share with us the lens you're bringing to this conversation. What perspective do you bring to donor advised fund giving? Perhaps, Erika, you can lead us off.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. My perspective is really working one-on-one with major and principal gift donors and leading a team of gift officers who are working directly with those donors, and many of them do have DAFs.
Great, thank you. Sharon?
So in addition to thinking about donors, individual donors, we are also focusing in our organization on corporate donors and foundations and other types of donors that are utilizing donor advised funds and really seeing how they are expanding their options for giving. And internally, making sure that we are thinking about how do we talk to these donors and how do we make sure that we are internally aligning our processes, whether it be, looking at our data to making sure we send the right acknowledgements. So there are a lot of things to think about around donor advised funds.
Excellent. Thank you, Sharon. And Dan, your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and thanks for inviting me to join this group. The Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative, our mission is to provide reliable empirical research that enhances the public understanding of donor advised funds. So pretty much almost every topic we'll be discussing in this conversation, we should have some data or some good statistics on. And if we don't, I'm taking notes for future research. So.
Oh, that's great, Dan. Yes. Data points for all of this conversation is super important, of course. And Elaine, what perspective do you bring to our conversation today?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. So, of course, I bring the perspective of a donor advised fund sponsor. I work for Vanguard Charitable, one of the largest grant makers in the United States. And so we're issuing hundreds of thousands of grants a year, supporting tens of thousands of individuals and corporations who are trying to give effectively. So we can really bring that perspective. And one thing I just always like to lead off of in these types of conversations is to remember that the donors of a Vanguard Charitable and a donor advised fund are also all of your donors. And so I think if we approach that conversation with that in mind, it can be really effective.
Wonderful. That's excellent. Thank you. And Dan, a question specifically for you. Your team at the Donor Advised Research Collaborative just released your annual Donor Advised Fund report for 2025. Could you please give us a few highlights? What do we need to know about donor advised funds as context for this conversation?
For sure. So what the report shows from this last year is that in all measures, donor advised funds continue to grow. So the number of accounts, the number of people using donor advised funds, the money coming into donor advised funds, the money going out of donor advised funds, the assets in donor advised funds, it's all growing. So donor advised funds continue to be a really prominent vehicle in charitable giving. So that's kind of the first big takeaway. They continue to grow. We measured the amount of money going into donor advised funds as a percentage of total charitable giving in the US. It's about 15% of all charitable giving, and it's about 23% of all individual giving. So it's a major piece of the pie when we're talking about all charitable giving. The second big takeaway from the report is that there's a lot of different organizations that are getting into hosting and sponsoring donor advised funds. And so some of the newer types of organizations we call donation processors. These are organizations that allow workplace giving platforms, and they use the donor advised fund model. They use the donor advised fund structure to do workplace giving. There's also large kind of online giving platforms. Think of like PayPal and others that do mass scale giving. They're also using donor advised funds to facilitate charity at a much lower, kind of smaller gift level. And then we also look at universities and healthcare, universities, higher ed and healthcare getting into hosting donor advised funds. Religiously affiliated organizations have always been there for a long time, but we're starting to kind of highlight the role that they play. So there's a lot of different types of organizations that are out there sponsoring DAFs.
No, that's fascinating. So it's really a growing field, and there's a lot of innovation happening within the field itself.
That's right.
Excellent. So to this point about engaging donors who choose donor advised funds as their giving mechanism, Elaine, in your role, can you tell us how donor advised sponsors work with donors? What do you see as your role in the process?
Yeah, I mean, I think in its simplest form, we're helping donors give to charity, right? We're a tool to help them execute on their giving goals. And what we find with donor advised funds, and I think the data that Dan just shared really highlights this point, is that we're able to stand out as a tool because we're helping them give really thoughtfully. They can be very intentional. And what we find in most cases is they give more over time when they give with a donor advised fund. I think that time element is so important, and what makes the tool unique is that you can sustain your giving patterns over time when you choose to give with a donor advised fund. And so I think when I look at that from the eyes of a recipient grantee or a nonprofit organization, when you look at an organization like Vanguard Charitable, we're a national donor advised fund. Dan listed out a whole bunch of different structures. But what that means for us is we don't have a point of view on what a good charity is to give to, outside, of course, the rules of the IRS and the tax code. But we do have a really strong perspective on good giving styles and what I often call good giving hygiene, right? And so we can help donors make sure that they have a plan, make sure that they're giving in alignment with their values. We can help them take that step back and reflect. We really promote giving unrestricted to give the maximum amount of control and authority to that recipient nonprofit organization. We find with donor advised funds, individuals and corporations are giving on more of a recurring basis, right? Because you can set that schedule up with the tool. But at the highest level, the money is already set aside and at the ready for you to give to those causes you care about. And we also help donors to be responsive to emerging needs. I think that is a more and more critical role that we play. Again, because those dollars, the nature of a donor advised fund, they are at the ready. That's what we always like to say. And so you can deploy them to your favorite causes, the ones you give to year over year, but you also can immediately deploy them and grant them to a cause that you found out about. You know, a family member becomes ill and you want to give to a research organization. There's a natural disaster, which unfortunately feels like that's increasing, right? And you can respond. So the idea of those dollars being ready for you to use, and then many DAF partners now even offer resources and tools to help you be responsive really quickly, is becoming a bigger role that we play. The other thing I will say, the role that we will play, and then I'll cede the floor, is that we help ensure the giving is done safely and with quality. The typical donor shouldn't need to worry about, is this going to a charitable cause? Is this something that I can take a tax deduction for? Can I be sure that my money will be used for the purpose it's intended? That's a role that we can play because of our sophisticated due diligence engine, and we'll review both the organization that you're issuing the grant to, but then also importantly, how the funds will be deployed so that donor can give with so much conviction.
Excellent. No, thank you. I'm sure we'll come back to many of these points, Elaine, but this was really very exciting. And then Erika, question for you. How do you integrate donor advised funds into your major and principal gift strategies? When a donor gives,
Yeah.
yeah, when a donor gives for a donor advised fund, how does that affect how you engage with them?
Yeah, I think I want to clear up one thing, and we often say this in the sector, how do we engage a DAF donor? And Richard, you were really intentional today. You said donors who give through DAFs, which I really appreciated because DAFs are a giving vehicle similar to appreciated assets, real estate, IRA giving. And so we're really at St. Jude engaging with a donor that's giving through a donor advised fund, really rooted how we would engage with any donor who's giving to St. Jude. And that's really thinking about how can we engage with them relationally. What does it mean, just like any other donor, to employ the best practices of saying thank you, sharing impact, and engaging where we can. So that's first and foremost. We're doing the fundamentals of best practice of moves management. As a leader of our fundraising division, I'm looking at what donors who are giving through DAF are also giving through other giving vehicles, other giving channels, and what is their giving behavior over time telling us that might bubble them up for assignment? Because we can't assign every donor that gives to our organizations because assignment and working relationally is often a limited resource that's based on, staff availability. But what is this donor telling us over time that might help us think through they want to engage with us in a deeper level? And what can we do to follow those best practices of relational moves management strategies?
Great. Thank you, Erika. That's very practical advice. That's nice. And Sharon, a similar question then for you. How do you integrate donor advised funds into your plan giving strategies? How does a donor who chooses to contribute to a donor advised fund, how do you engage with them from that perspective?
Well, I think one of the really interesting things about, first of all, I agree 100% with what Erika was saying, is that our jobs, first and foremost, is to talk and engage with donors about our mission and how they want to give and what kind of impact they want to see with their giving. And then there are various options that they can use. One of those is donor advised funds. We often know then who has made a gift from a donor advised fund, and it gives us an interesting lens into them. And I believe and encourage people to think about how that can open up conversations. Elaine was saying that one of the beautiful things about donor advised funds is that those funds are already set aside for charitable purposes. So you know automatically that your donor has a strategy for their philanthropy. Ask them about that. You can ask them, why did they set up a donor advised fund? People have very different reasons. They could have received an inheritance or gotten a big bonus from work or something that facilitated them to make a big gift to set up an account, or they really just wanted to structure their giving and be more intentional about it. And so donors I find, are very open to talking about their donor advised funds. You can also learn things when you talk with them about who's involved with your donor advised fund. Or are your children involved? Is your family members? Do you have it? Does it have an interesting name? The Golden Retrievers Fund. And what does that tell you about your donor? So thinking a little bit about that, you can ask a lot of questions that really illuminate more about your donors and about what they care about, that can take you further into your conversations about their giving.
Great. No, that's very good. Um, and I want to build on the point that's been made that funds that are in these donor advised funds are already set aside for philanthropic purposes. And then, Dan, to build on this, with the rise of donor advised funds, our sector has been concerned that many donors may invest in the donor advised fund vehicle, so there's money sitting in them, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the money is getting out into the community. Can you tell us more about trends in this area?
For sure. Yeah, this is probably the most common question that we get and the most the biggest concern that people have is there's money just sitting there that, how do we get it out into the community? But what we see as we look at the data, first at the big picture level, this last annual report, if you look at, all DAFs kind of together, the annual, payout rate is around 25%. So all things together, the money is moving about a quarter of the money in donor advised funds move out every year to be deployed through grants. So kind of depends on how you measure payout rates. There's a little bit of a debate over that. So, but in any case, the range is somewhere between 18 to 25%. So between about 4 to 5 years, the money will move out completely through donor advised funds. The other really big thing to understand is that donor advised funds facilitate a really wide range of giving patterns. So we were able to look at individual level accounts, about tens of thousands of accounts throughout the country, and what we see is some people will move the money in and out in a matter of days and months. Some people will use their donor advised fund to plan for next generation philanthropy, and so the same tool, the same donor advised fund tool, facilitates both of those giving patterns. And so it's really hard to kind of think of donor advised funds as a monolith that's just being used one way. It's really a tool that's being used in thousands of different ways. And so giving is there's a lot of variety. But we did take a look at the different accounts and kind of trying to find, how quickly the money is being moved through. What we did is we had access to money moving in and then money moving out over about a 9-year period. And so we tested, we measured how long does it take for money to get out of a donor advised fund. And what we found is that after about 3 years, most donor advised fund accounts had spent all or most of the money that they put in originally. So in about 3 years, most of the DAFs have given it all away. Then you got about another 45-ish% of accounts that will hang on to a little bit longer. But after about 8 years, which is the end of our data set, we found that 75% of the DAFs had given away all or about half. And then there remained about 8 to 10% of the accounts that really hadn't done a whole lot in the 8-year period that we were able to look at. So yes, it's a concern. Yes, there are some folks who put money into a DAF and don't know what to do with it and aren't not using it. But I think it's important to keep that concern, in perspective of the grant making that is happening. And I hope those numbers give you a sense of how quickly money is being moved through. But again, there are about 8 to 10% of accounts that really don't do a whole lot in an 8-year period.
And Richard, if it's okay, if I just jump in there, Dan, I really appreciate that perspective, especially the point about that there's so many different giving patterns and reasons somebody might be using their DAF or the rate at which they're giving. I also just offer that time can be a really big friend here, because what we have found is that when donors aren't forced to make that decision about where their money's going all at year end, maybe right after they got their bonus, to Sharon's example, and then they have 5 days to decide where the money's going, because that element of time is built in, we see that they give to a wider variety of causes over time. We see that they give more unrestricted over time, so some of those good hygiene habits I mentioned earlier. And we also find that they give more over time. So they build confidence in the tool. And so that wouldn't have happened if you didn't have that element of time built in as well.
Sorry, do you mind if I piggyback a little bit on one thing Elaine said earlier? Actually, she talked about being able to deploy assets in times when there's a crisis, right? Which, in the days that we're living in, things are happening on a daily basis that would move a donor to want to make a donation. We did a study where we looked at 2020 and looked at people who gave to pandemic-related causes and social justice, racial justice-related causes. And we found that donor advised funds who had donors who were using donor advised funds, they still maintained their giving, their prior giving that they were doing before 2020, but they were able to increase donations to other organizations that they had previously not been giving to. We call that slack. So donor advised funds have a little bit of slack in there where people can increase their giving in moments where they feel the need to.
My most off-cited research, Dan. I love that.
No, this is really fascinating. And Elaine, I wanted to build on some of this as well in terms of perceived barriers in giving through this mechanism. Another common conception for nonprofits is that most donors who give through these mechanisms are anonymous and therefore they're hard to steward. What is your experience in this? Any advice for nonprofits to meet this challenge?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you put it as perceived, right? Because that's not what's happening in reality. And I welcome Erika and Sharon to kind of piggyback on my comments then for what they say. So at least at Vanguard Charitable, we know that we believe in having the option to give anonymously. That's been a long held tradition of charitable giving, well outside donor advised funds. So we're not have no interest in taking away that option. But what we find is that most donors are giving with some form of recognition when they give. I think it's less than 3 to 4% on an annual basis of our grants are going out the door without donor contact information, the name of the fund, as Sharon referenced, the colorful golden retriever example, right? So information as a way for you to continue to both record keep, but also very critically engage with that donor. There's a lot of reasons, again, that are not unique to donor advised funds, why somebody might choose to give anonymously. And our perspective on that is to protect that and enable it. But it's just not an often used tool.
One thing that I realize is that for a charity or nonprofit to receive the money in an acknowledgement letter, they don't need to provide tax information in their acknowledgement to the donor who's giving
That's
through
right.
the advice fund. They've already received that from you.
That's right. But I hope you will still thank them, and I hope you will still add them to your mailing list and your cultivation list, etc. And I think so many of the great tips that Sharon and Erika outlined, how you might cultivate them a bit differently because you know they have a donor advised fund.
Great. So a question now for Sharon and then for you, Erika, just in terms of, helping our audience today who work in the nonprofit sector, they work with nonprofits. What other practical tips would you share with fundraisers that are joining us today? What are some proactive positive things and what are some mistakes to avoid, either dealing with a sponsor of, facilitating this type of giving or through the donor themselves?
So I think there are so many fantastic things about donor advised funds. I'm hard pressed to find the negatives because I really do. We see donors really doing so much more with them and creating wonderful impact. And the notion that this money is sort of sitting in donor advised funds, I think we need to change that thinking about that. And perhaps we might know, a donor might tell us, well, I have $500,000 in my donor advised fund. There's probably a really good reason for that, that they made a gift in 1 year so they could make gifts over a number of years. Or so there are lots of reasons behind that. And I love Dan's research about how it gets paid out. So I think some of the other advantages when I talk to donors is donor advised funds can help you accept more gifts that we couldn't handle in-house. Elaine, I'm sure there's a team at Vanguard that can handle gifts of real estate or gifts of other types of interests that here at the IRC, we have a pretty small staff. And so when donor, and it used to be kind of a challenge of, how are we going to manage this? But now it's a very easy conversation to be able to have with a donor to say, well, if they're thinking about giving another asset, which is always what we're trying to get them to think about, right? Get them to think outside of the cash bucket. So if they're thinking about giving another type of asset, it's a very easy transition to ask them, oh, well, do you have a donor advised fund? Have you considered opening a donor advised fund? Because they can very easily facilitate that gift. And in some cases, people might want to make a gift to your organization as well as to others, or a gift over time. And a donor advised fund can provide them that flexibility. So for an organization like ours, it's a blessing that the DAF sponsoring organizations have the ability to handle assets that we don't necessarily have that expertise. We don't have that expertise in-house. So I think that's a real wonderful benefit. I would also say that there's, when we're talking about donors who give through their DAF, it is important in our marketing and in our conversations. We think about marketing or talking to donors who give through DAFs on a not just on the major gifts level, but at any level. And to acknowledge that this is one way that they're giving really helps them be seen, if you will, and that you're acknowledging that they're really being thinking about their philanthropy in a special way. And I guess to Elaine's point about acknowledging is very important. We find that we do have some anonymous donors, but we're able to match some people back. And where we have relationships, we usually know where those gifts are coming in. But the proper acknowledgement is very important. Not sending a typical, they've already gotten there. And for anyone who's a beginner, they're to donor advised funds, they will get their tax acknowledgement when they make their gift to the donor advised fund. There isn't that sort of tax acknowledgement requirement when they make a grant to an organization, but we absolutely have to thank them and do it with the proper language that is really acknowledging their gift, but not providing the tax language, if you will. I think that was a couple of mine. I don't know. I have lots of great things about them. So,
but Sharon, I love that. I want to piggyback on a couple of things that you said. I love that you leaned into using your database and the donors that are currently giving to your organization and asking them if they have a donor advised fund. I mean, a lot of times I hear charities saying, I need to go to Vanguard or I need to go to Fidelity and make a good relationship with them so more donors give to our organization. And we've really taken the approach of let's share stories of people that are currently giving through donor advised funds. They're the hero. Let's share how they've given through donor advised funds. Then they might open up the door for other donors to either consider giving out of the donor advised fund that they already have that we didn't know they had, or creating a donor advised fund. So we're really looking at having our gift officers ask those questions, marketing, sharing stories about giving through donor advised funds so that we're encouraging our donor base rather than trying to externally prospect for new donors who have donor advised funds as our only means of expanding those donations. So I think that's a really practical tip. Similar to you, Sharon, I think DAFs help us more than that I'm concerned that they are not distributing funds and are keeping donors anonymous. They're helping us accept more gifts, and they're helping donors be more intentional about their giving. And it was really born out of some problems that we were having as a sector of getting acknowledgments right. These donors that are giving to so many different charities, we're having a hard time putting together their annual deductions, and like those DAFs make that a lot easier for our donors. So it's a good thing. Similar to you, when we might only get the name of the fund or maybe an address, we might not be able to use the resources of our prospect development team, our prospect research team for every donor that comes in and gives through a DAF. But on the larger gifts, we can do that additional research and see if we can do some matching that might help us do some very soft and light outreach over time. And then we'll even ask our database, have you given through a donor advised fund and we haven't had the chance to thank you? Please let us know. So we're trying to be proactive and saying, if you haven't heard from us, we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that you have this donor advised fund. So let us know. Reach out to us and tell us that you've made this gift. So there's a couple things that we're doing within our own database. But we're really using any time that we're one-on-one with donors, we're asking, do you have a donor advised fund? Or do you have intention to set up one? And we are using that as a way to start a conversation about why they give, what their interests are, what benefits do they need, what do they want to accomplish. And that's usually a main part of that conversation, similar to you, Sharon.
And can I add one more point too? Thanks, Erika. With my plan giving hat on, a wonderful donors can make your organization a beneficiary
Yes.
of create it as part of their succession plan. And so that's a wonderful conversation to have as well. To say, Erika, I noticed that you've been giving from your donor advised fund. You've been supporting us for so many years. Did you know, or have you thought about making St. Jude's a beneficiary of your donor advised fund as a part of your estate plan? And actually, it might have even been Elaine who shared this with me and said, you know what, it's actually a tremendous estate gift, because all of those reasons that we mentioned before about how assets from a donor advised fund get to the organization quickly, that is the fastest estate gift that you can make. Because it really does come to us next day, just like a regular outright gift, because that succession plan that beneficiary plan is already in place. And so that's also a great conversation for donors when you're trying to introduce plan gifts and estate giving. And it's actually a very natural, easy way that you can bring up the topic and start to talk about that larger, more holistic giving with donors.
I love that, Sharon. We're putting that in every legacy mail piece that we put out. Have you made a succession plan for your donor advised fund? And we're asking that question. That's exactly right.
I love hearing that. And I also, if I can, Richard, just double click on something Sharon had mentioned. So I think when it comes to the succession planning, the estate gifts, I think we all know those can sometimes be fairly painful to liquidate and process them. So donor advised funds absolutely can handle that. But then to Sharon's point about more complex assets that a donor might want to give. And so I love hearing that that's where you might position a donor advised fund, because that's something we do really, really well. And we're also seeing increasing interest in. So not only just when the public markets are up, right? Many nonprofit organizations can't even handle accepting a share of Apple, for example. But we are also seeing the private markets are also doing really well. And we're seeing increased interest in donors giving those types of assets, which quickly become very difficult for somebody who doesn't have the expertise to liquidate. So that's another big role a donor advised fund can play. We liquidate it, and now it's charitable capital, right? And it's ready to be deployed.
These are all really excellent observations. And I think, opening it up to everyone, it's also sort of to summarize a bit what we've been discussing, and then making sure there's time for the Q&A session for our audience. In terms of engaging with the donor who decides to give through this donor advised fund mechanism, asking the questions, just engaging them directly, coming out and asking them. So in terms of like personal stories or experiences with us, how do you know you've been successful in maximizing these engagement opportunities, either from the advisor perspective or from the nonprofit perspective? What are signs that you're effectively reaching out to your donor base who give through this mechanism? Perhaps, Erika, you could ask a bit, provide a bit more context for this. I mean, you were starting to give some stories of how you've been successful.
Yeah, one donor in particular stands out to me. They gave a $25,000 gift at the end of the year through their DAF. It came to us in January as a potential lead because it was an amount that flags for us to think about assignment to a gift officer. And all we had was their address and their name. That's it. They did not match with any other donor that we had, so we didn't have an email, we didn't have a phone number. And that relationship manager, old school, just said that handwritten note. We see that you've done this. This is amazing. I don't have your phone number. I would love to say thank you to you. And here's my contact information. This donor actually got back to her. And we set up, it was during the pandemic, we set up a virtual tour that was led by me as a former patient. And we took this donor through some parts of the hospital. That donor gave a $100,000 gift after that to one of our campaigns, and now they've been involved several times. They've done named a lab. They've come to several of our events. They've given through several other giving vehicles, and now they're starting to invite their network to give. So this all came from one donor advised fund gift and that handwritten note that we did with little contact information. So that to me is the success story that we want to see for those donors that are giving through DAFs who want to engage with us relationally. We're finding them early, we're outreaching consistently, and we're giving them ways to see their impact and get involved in different ways. So I'm looking for those donors to consistently give over time, increase their giving, and give through other giving channels, maybe ultimately leaving a legacy to St. Jude. And that's real success to me.
This is really good. So, Erika, thank you. This is one of the questions we've received now is how you contact your database to see how are they giving through their donor advised funds. You're basically just going out and asking the questions.
Yeah, that particular donor, we got an acknowledgement from, it may have even been Vanguard that sent us the note, this donor had given, here's their contact information. But in terms of utilizing our database for mailing, I mean, we're utilizing some sophistication in terms of segmentation on age. What we kind of have an idea of our typical donor that's giving through a DAF, and then we're able to apply that to the rest of our database. And then we might send out a year-end mailing that says, have you considered giving to St. Jude through your donor advised fund? Have you considered giving through your retirement fund? So we're looking at age, we're looking at some demographics, and we're using those as a way to do some additional mailings that might target people who are likely to have a donor advised fund.
Okay.
Richard,
Yeah,
would that be okay if I just added one more thing to what Erika was saying?
of course.
This is right on. One of our research projects, we interviewed 48 professional fundraisers all around the country and asked them these questions. How are you working with donors who use DAFs? What are best practices? A couple things that came across in those interviews is they were doing exactly what Erika was saying, where they're reaching out to donors after they've made their grant. But some of them would use, even if it was a lower gift, if the gift was lower than their normal threshold for assigning a gift officer, let's say it was normally they assign it 25,000 and it was a 10,000 or 5,000 or even 1,000 or something. But if they knew it came from a donor advised fund, they knew that there was an account behind that grant that had money that could be deployed for more grant making. And so they flagged those donors who even had a little bit of a lower threshold, and they reached out to them in a special way, and they began engaging. We know that the median account size for donor advised funds is about $50,000. So even if you get a $1,000 gift, there's a chance that there's $50,000 in the account or more. So that was one thing that we saw that I thought was really, really insightful.
Very nice. Thank you, Dan. This is a good addition to this. One question is, we have a couple questions here, and then we're opening up to questions from our audience. But one question is, do donor advised fund sponsors help donors find nonprofits? Do any of you have recommendations on how nonprofits can engage better with sponsors from a prospecting perspective, if at all possible?
I'm happy to jump in first. Oh, go ahead, Sharon. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just give a basic, and you might have even shared this with me at first, Elaine. So it's not to, reach out to all the donor advised fund sponsors, but I do believe this came from you, Elaine. A great piece of advice that you might not be thinking of, many DAF sponsoring organizations utilize charity rating, paid Charity Navigator, Candid. I'm sure you could speak to that, Elaine. And so if if you have not looked at those ratings for your organization, your first job today should be to look and make sure that your ratings are as high as possible, or that you're doing what you can to make sure that those ratings are as high as possible, because many DAF sponsoring organizations, that's part of their algorithm, if they might share anything, or that's what they're pointing donors to. They're not suggesting an organization, but they're pointing people to some of these other rating systems. So, which is, I'm sure, what you were going to say, Elaine, but it was such a great piece of advice. And one of the first things we did, we're a large organization and we weren't tip top at that time. And so we got on that immediately. And we've actually had some conversations we actually received a really large gift recently. And it was from an organization that had said, well, we looked at your rankings, and that's how this gift came about to us. So.
Oh my gosh, I love that story. Thanks, Sharon. Well, and that was exactly what I was going to say. You have to be able to be found. That's kind of step number one. And most, especially larger DAF sponsors, are using some type of database for when a donor logs into their account online, right, and needs to find the charity they want to grant to. They're searching within a database. So they can absolutely name an organization that might not be in the database, but we use Candid, for example. And so you want to make sure your information's up to date there. You want to make sure that you're tagged in a way that you want to be found. Like if it's food insecurity is your area of interest, make sure that that's something you have tagged. So again, that donors can find you. And then outside of that, I think to the broader question, we welcome relationships with our nonprofit partners. I have great relationships with both Sharon and Erika's organizations, as a matter of fact. But it still does go back to you developing that relationship with your donor, because my job is to make sure when a donor expresses an interest in an organization that I help the dollars get there really quickly, safely, effectively. We also, though, I will say more and more, try to offer tools to help donors curate the wide variety of options they have to give. So most donors come in and they have interest areas that are appeal to them, causes that might be dear to them, organizations they're already supporting, and that we do really, really well today. And then, as I said, they become introduced to new causes over time. And so we're exploring what does that look like and what is our role to play there in helping them go through, what is it, like 2 million something, does somebody know, nonprofit organizations that exist? How can they curate that into something that has meaning for them? And that's really a combination of technology and particularly for some of our ultra high net worth donors, maybe some more hands-on philanthropic consulting. So that is definitely a space we are playing more and more in, just because of the sheer volume of giving we're helping to facilitate.
Thank you, Elaine. So we're getting quite a few questions from our audience, and so Dan, you mentioned that 25% of donor advised funds on average, the funding in them go out. Are donor advised fund donors generally trying to pay down these accounts?
Generally, yeah. We see that most people are not keeping the money in there more than 3 to 5 years. So the other thing about paying down the account, not only will they put money in and use it within 3 to 5 years, but then they'll add more money into it. And so it's not a one-time vehicle. It's you put a chunk in when you have a wealth event, and then you have some giving for a few years, and then you'll you'll use it in the near future, and then you put some more and use it in the near future. So that's the predominant kind of behavior that we see. The other question, part of that question, also asks about like kind of people that take an endowment or kind of foundation approach where they only spend a little bit at a time. There are what we call endowed DAFs out there where that is the model. There's a spending policy where they can't spend more than 5 or 6% a year, and so it's really designed to maintain long-term philanthropy. So again, DAFs support like a really wide range of giving.
That's fascinating. An endowed DAFT mechanism. So then they are having like a 5% payout from that.
Yeah, they actually have a cap on how much they can grant out to preserve. Yeah.
Okay. Another question from audience is that in terms of syntax and language, do you panelists, do you think that leaning into the language of grant making rather than donation holds more meaning for donors that are choosing to give through donor advised funds? Perhaps Sharon, you can think of something. If
I
this,
I don't. I'm going to go back to what Erika started with. It's about the mission and how, I mean, donors use different words to think about their philanthropy anyway. So I think it really is making sure that we are leading with mission and impact and getting to know that donor and seeing how they think their giving is fits into that. And then asking the question, have you thought about how you want to fund your gift? And then you can listen, and then you can even have some additional questions. I see you have a donor advised fund, or have you thought about it? So there's lots of places you can go from there, but I think the mission is first, and that but Elaine's more on the business side, I guess you might say, of it. But I think that folks that generally have a donor advised fund understand the process and the language around that.
okay. So good. So language neutral, pretty much in that regard. But
that's what I would say. I don't know if anyone else feels differently.
Another question, haven't really spoken about this context, but could any of the panelists, could you speak a little more about workplace giving, that utilizing donor advised funds as the giving mechanism?
I'm happy to share that from the research perspective. It's one of the fastest growing number of accounts. These organizations, one example would be Benevity, is an organization that handles workplace giving. They work with large corporations. When you show up for your first day at work, you get a healthcare plan, you get your 401k, and you get your giving account, and they're using a DAF to facilitate that. There's a little platform where you put a little bit of your paycheck aside, and then you give out of that platform. So it's a really popular tool, not high volume, but very quick money moving through there. So really kind of low account sizes, relatively lower gift sizes, but a lot of accounts. So that's one of the examples of a workplace giving DAF that we're seeing.
Great. Another question from the audience is that, building on what we've been talking about in terms of getting seen, becoming visible for a nonprofit, with reliance on candid and other rating mechanisms, is there a concern that smaller organizations might get lost in the mix? How can you better connect donors who want to work more with community-based organizations? Perhaps, Elaine, you could.
Yeah, so I mean, I one of the things I would first say is that there might be a little bit of a misnomer built into that. So the database itself and I'm not going to make a value judgment on some of the rating tools, right? But they all tend to be very public about how they're prioritizing organizations, how you can get a strong rating. So I think, to Sharon's example, and if that's important to you, investing in that and understanding how you can best show up in those tools. How Vanguard Charitable uses it is truly like a database, right? So you are going into it and you can search for it, you can filter through it. And Candid has filters built into it, like the size of an organization, the region in which it's located. And so if that's important to you to give to larger organizations and maybe more established, there's a way for you to filter to that. If it's more important to you to give to some of those more upstart or ones that might have more blatant need, right? Just because they're smaller and more leanly run, you can filter by that. And so I think it still comes back to what the donor is interested in supporting and less about the infrastructure and tools that the donor advised fund sponsor may be using around it.
And I would add to that, one of the things that we haven't really touched on too much in this conversation today is community foundations. So Elaine, Vanguard is one of the largest national donor advised funds. There are many people that had donor advised funds through local community foundations. And that, Erika is going to speak to that, I think, a little bit, but that relationship can be very different. And those are often folks who they want to know about your mission, not just about their DAF, but they want to know what you're doing so that they can share it with donors who may choose to give through their DAF. And so I see a lot of questions about getting in front of DAFs. Again, it's about how do you share your mission, and community foundations are very receptive to those kinds of conversations. Erika, I see you want to share something
Yes,
about that.
I'm so excited. I live in a very small community. So I work for St. Jude, but I do it remotely. I live in a very small community, and I'm on the board of our local community foundation and our local Habitat chapter. And when you're looking at this strategy as a small community organization, use that to your benefit. That smallness and that closeness to donors can be a real advantage. Some of the times the donors at St. Jude, we're in Memphis, Tennessee, so they have a harder time feeling connected to us. We have to do more to get them to feel like they're a part of the hospital's mission than what you can do as a local Habitat chapter or as a local animal shelter or other local organizations to stay close to your donors. And partnering with your community foundation, most communities have small community foundations. That's where those donors are giving, and they're distributing funds to other nonprofits through their community foundation. So lean into being small and being able to have those one-on-one relationships with your donors, and utilizing a DAF on the other side to maybe help them accept a gift that you might not be able to normally accept. And either the community foundation or a larger sponsor organization. That's right, Sharon.
And I would just say that's what we see happening, right? So certainly donors are giving to household name charities for sure, of which both of you are employed by, right? So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. But we see that, I don't have the 2025 numbers in front of me, but what we've seen over time is it's nearly 2/3 of giving goes back into the locality of where the donor lives, right? And so that's already happening. And so I think taking some of Erika's great points and how do you just accelerate that?
Wonderful. Thank you. This has been a very enlightening and rich conversation, and we're coming to the end. So in terms of wrap up, I'd like to call on each of the panelists in a sentence or two to give some final thoughts, maybe specifically to an organization that our audience is representing. If those organizations made one small change in the next 6 months related to donor advised funds, what would that be? So perhaps Dan, you can go first.
For sure. I would just say try to keep better track in your CRM of who's using a DAF, what the name of the account is, what organization it is. Just better data management on DAF donors will allow you to build better relationships in the future.
Great. Thank you. And Sharon?
I was going to say something similar to what Dan said. Pay attention. Look at your systems. Do you actually know who your DAF donors are? And then build your conversations from there. So make sure that your systems are set up so that you are capturing that information appropriately, acknowledging people appropriately, and then think about how you can build the conversations from there. And then I always have to say, lead with mission first. This is a way of giving, but we really need to be relating about our mission first. And when we do that, the money's already set aside, it's already there, and we're just going to make it that much easier for them to give.
Great. Thank you, Sharon. Erika?
Yeah, I wanted to address a lot of questions in the chat we maybe not have addressed exactly about building a relationship with the sponsor organizations for DAFs. And that can be an important tool, but I would encourage our audience to think about professional advisors as a whole, financial advisors as a whole, in terms of your strategy. Even if you're in a small nonprofit that's in a local or regional kind of setting, getting to know your donors' professional advisors and then continuing to build relationships with them over time about how they can help their clients impact the legacy that they want to leave. That's going to be a more fruitful strategy in my mind than specifically targeting Vanguard or Fidelity or some of the other organizations. Like, just think about professional advisors as a strategy as a whole. Oftentimes we are going to conferences where we know professional advisors will be, and just offering resources that are helpful to their clients and being there as as a resource to them.
And that leads us to Elaine, your final thoughts. Thank you.
Erika, such a great tip. We didn't even touch on that at all. I'm glad you caught that. I was going to say something similar to Dan and Sharon, that you should treat these donors who give with a DAF like there's more where that came from. And then that filters into everything else, because they're the most likely to give you more. They're the most likely to do repeat gifts. And so it's well worth your time. And then the only other thing I would add is that if you're not talking about DAFs, as part of your stewardship and fundraising, start inserting the word into your vocabulary. Your donors are giving with a donor advised fund. You just are likely unaware of it. And so I would start inserting that into your vernacular.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a tremendous conversation. Thank you for your time, and I hope it's been important and beneficial for all of our audience members. Thank you so much.